I want to start by saying tonight's program is made possible by the Seattle Public Library Foundation. And as we acknowledged, it's taking place on indigenous lands. And for the last 25 years, we have hosted special civic engagement programs just like this one. And they were designed to create a space for community togetherness that celebrates inclusivity and racial justice during challenging political times in our country. We also do this because libraries are the backbone of democracy. In them, we find knowledge and power along with intellectual freedom.
Today, we've been brought together to rebirth a nation, to hear letters from the future. And what I love about this program is that it rests with us, with our stories, and how we inspire each other to not only imagine a better world, but help each other actually create it.
I'm not just thinking about school because it starts in a week. Coming from a family who used education to overcome circumstance, I can't remember a time I wasn't told or didn't know that education was the most important aspect of my life. My love and appreciation for learning, fostered early on, grows the more and more I learn.
My father moved here to give opportunities to his children that he didn't have access to growing up. His journey to America consisted of harassment, poverty, and odd jobs. My job as a student was to make this journey worth it. From a young age, I fell in love with education.
Education is where it all starts. Not only does education prepare us for lives and careers, but it is how we learn about, better understand, and appreciate ourselves, others, and the world. But in schools where racism is affirmed, true history is ignored, and students aren't uplifted, those idyllic views of education are far from reality.
Students know the system through and through because they've lived it, but they're constantly excluded from decision-making as well as negatively impacted by school and district-wide decisions. Who better to vocalize students' needs than the students themselves, especially the ones furthest from justice? That's what the founders of the NAACP Youth Council asked and answered.
The NAACP Youth Council is a group of students dedicated to racial equity and justice in the Seattle Public School District and beyond. We're fighting for a future where our list of demands to the school board, from mandating ethnic studies to staff training, are realized. Erica and I want to see our demands not only reflected in Seattle, but across the country.
Imagine you're walking through the hallways of one of these schools. The walls are full of vibrant posters affirming the diverse student body, promoting clubs like Muslim Student Association. Traditional Chinese New Year lanterns? Are showcased along with other community and student art, filling the halls with beauty and positivity.
As you pass by a classroom, you glance over and see a teacher greeting their students at the door. They are part of a well-paid staff, as diverse, supportive, and eager to be there as the student body. They are a role model and inspiration to the students they teach, who see themselves and their successes in their teacher.
Today's lesson, parabolas, ellipses, and how Katherine Johnson used them to make incalculable contributions to spaceflight. Every subject, K through 12, including math, has ethnic studies incorporated in. Because of this, the students understand one another from a point of compassion, with accurate knowledge on their backgrounds, and are able to better learn together.
Instead of taking yet another test, which can't measure all their value or intelligence, the students are working on an engaging project. Informed by district-wide trainings on anti-racism and on cultural responsiveness, the teacher honors each student by being flexible about how they complete the project.
The next room you pass by is empty, but it's usually used for restorative justice circles. Instead of having suspension or expulsion be the primary response, students work through conflict by sitting down and talking it out with the support of their community. They know that they are loved and cared about and not just another statistic or problem.
When things get too stressful, either in school or out of school, you know that there are mental health specialists, teachers, and other students who can support you. Although your school challenges you to the best of your abilities, they still make sure you can balance your academics, athletics, social life, mental, and emotional health.
Finally, you arrive at your destination, the main office. The paper holder next to the door has the school newsletter in multiple languages, advertises cultural community events, and holds a flyer on upcoming school board meetings, which are staggered at different times and days so they're accessible to everyone in the community.
You're at the main office to thank your principal for all that they've done for you and your school. It's been an amazing 4 years, and because of the equitable resources your school provided, you feel well prepared for life after high school. whether that be community college, a 4-year university, trade school, working, or traveling.
In a few days, you'll be graduating along with everyone in your grade. Unafraid of failure, full of compassion, overflowing with knowledge and eager to learn even more. You are not just capable of changing the world, you're excited to do it. And it's all because of your educational experience, or more likely to say your learning experience.
We've been using the term education pretty loosely throughout this presentation, but what we really want to do is fundamentally change the education system into a learning system. The root word of education is civilization, and the unfortunate implication is socialization and oppression. Learning, however, is a liberating journey. It means following the sole of one's foot.
If you have a passion for learning similar to ours, please join us in the fight to advance our demands. 1. Support the Black Lives Matter at school actions such as end zero tolerance policies. 2. Mandate ethnic studies as well as improve the existing curriculum. 3. Increase youth voice by increasing student involvement opportunities. 4. Renovate Rainier Beach High School. A Seattle public school that hasn't had a major renovation since it was built in 1959. 5. Increase access to post-secondary opportunities and mental health services. 6. Overhaul discipline practices, implementing restorative justice district-wide. 7. Mandate staff training on issues of race and equity. And lastly, 8. Hire and retain more staff of color.
It won't be easy, but ask yourself, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Do you want your kids and grandkids to stand up here in a few decades and wish for the same things we are? Or do you want your courage, hope, love, and strength to have made racial equity a reality for them?
Thank you for the opportunity to speak here tonight, and thank you to our peers in the NAACP Youth Council and our advisors John Greenberg, Rita Green, Sabrina Burr, and Virginia Patea. Thank you all for being here tonight, for not only reimagining a nation with us, but changing it. One more.
Follow us on social media and visit our website to find out about upcoming events, as well as stay updated on the progress being made. Sign up to testify at school board meetings by emailing or calling the district the Monday before the meeting at 8 a.m. sharp. Vote in the upcoming city council and school board elections. And please keep coming to amazing events like this one. Thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Hannah Bahram, and today I'm going to be giving a presentation about something that I believe is incredibly relevant to what is happening in our political environment today and what we are going to face whether we like it or not in our future. Today, as you probably already know, I'm going to be talking about gun violence and the stereotypes that surround it. So when most people think of gun violence, they think of school shootings. But in reality, gun violence can present itself in a variety of different ways. You'll see on the chart on the next slide, gun violence can look like suicides, homicides, law enforcement shootings, accidental shootings, thank you, and more. No matter the type of gun violence, all these need to be addressed by both the government, that includes, Congress, House of Representatives, and us, the people. Without us acknowledging these incidents, nothing is going to happen and nothing will change. And so there are many different groups of people who are working to battle the obstacles that this country faces from gun violence. One of the most well-known, especially in the Seattle area, is March for Our Lives. I actually worked for March for Our Lives for around 2-ish years, and so that's why this topic is so important to me. What I believe is really special about March for Our Lives is that it works through helping the younger generation kind of gain their voice. Something that I learned with March for Our Lives is about the upward trend in gun violence. When we think of the word upward trend, we think of growth and improvement. Yay, you have an upward trend in your grades, but this isn't really the case in this situation. The United States has seen an increase on the lack of gun control and how easy it has become for people to be able to find loopholes in our government system. When we look at gun violence in the US specifically, unfortunately we see that the United States is the leading country in the world when it comes to gun ownership. At first, we don't think of this as a bad thing, but some of these people haven't necessarily gone through the right background checks. I know this picture is really blurry, but I felt like it was a really good example of a scapegoat, which is defined as a person who is blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others. I think now, more than ever, we see scapegoats in our society. And whether or not, most scapegoats we see, especially for gun violence, is immigrants, Muslims, and those with mental health disabilities. Despite the real research and the proven facts, we still continue to make these associations out of fear, but blaming a scapegoat won't get rid of our problems. So this cover of Time magazine is probably my favorite ever. Besides the topic and the colors, I think the title is ridiculously meaningful. Do words kill? And I honestly think the answer is yes. One of the most common stereotypes we see in gun violence and terrorism as a whole is people from the Middle East. Now, my parents were originally born in Kerman, Iran. They were raised, they went to elementary school there, middle school there, college there. And with the politics we see in TV today, Iran is associated with a negative connotation. But to them, it's their home. After my parents were married, they decided they wanted to leave Iran because it wasn't a place that they felt comfortable to raise their children. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult to leave Iran. Even to enter Canada, which is what my family first had to do, it's borderline impossible. And it's because of these original Middle Eastern stereotypes that they would bring danger to this country. The pictures you've been seeing so far are kind of just pictures of kind of the highlights of Iran. And so why do we associate some races and cultures with gun violence and not others? Why is it so difficult for my family to enter the country, but not for people migrating from Europe, for example? Well, to this day, many would classify gun violence as a social problem. Going all the way back to the unfortunate attacks of 9/11 and media cover on only certain incidents, gun violence has slowly approached to increase as a social problem. So, despite the stereotypes placed on Middle Easterns for gun violence, I am proud of my culture and the way it has shaped the person I am today. This slide behind me is one of Iran's most beautiful mosques in the capital. And so, despite what many may think, Iranian culture gives route to grow respect through beautiful dance forms, art forms, and, surprisingly, rug making. And I wouldn't be the person I am today without this culture in my life. So I'm going to start talking a little bit, this is more of a sensitive part, about the statistics of who the shooters are and who the victims are. Now, none of this is to place any blame or to point any fingers, but it's important to actually look at these facts to push these stereotypes out of our mind, whether or not we realize we have these stereotypes in the first place. When we look at the races of the shooters of these crimes, we see that they are predominantly white males, not the minority stereotypes that people originally think of. And when we look at the victims of these crimes, we see that they are predominantly minorities, which isn't what we would usually think of. The slide that you can see behind me kind of emphasizes what I was just saying about who the victims and the shooters are of gun violence. And so I guess the question is, what can I do to stop gun violence? I'm just a high school kid, I haven't even graduated yet. We can stay educated on the stereotypes of these crimes. We can support peaceful protests and rallies, and we can contact our Congress representative and demand that they advocate for gun violence prevention. We have seen an increase in the amount of gun shootings over the years, but this doesn't mean it has to continue this way. In the past 5 years, what I believe to be one of the most powerful pieces of action is the banning of assault rifles and high-capacity ammunition in 2016. Unfortunately, this does mean the biggest piece of legislation we've had passed to address this was 3 years ago. What happens from here on out is up to us. We have no idea how long it will take or how much effort to stop the effects of gun violence. And it's not only these people who are running for the presidential election of 2020, it's up to us and what we can do to look past these stereotypes and recognize that there is an issue in this country. What can our country do in the future? I believe we are getting better. I believe there is a future without gun violence. In fact, this month we've seen a large push in Congress for stronger gun control measures. Every peaceful protest, every mention in Congress, we are getting one step closer to a safer and better future. Thank you.
Welcome back to the future. I say back because this is what we dreamed and imagined together. I'm Miriam, a young elder in 2049, and I am standing on reclaimed Duwamish land and what used to be the old United States. And so I welcome you to this journey with me. Thank you for unplugging from the present and being here to imagine with me. It takes courage to dream past our current demise. It is a radical act to dream and believe. It was your ability to dream and believe that got us here in the first place. So again, thank you and welcome. When I was young, I remember believing that the only way that 21st century system was going to serve us was if it was burned down and rebuilt. And honestly, it wasn't that far from happening. And so, before I get into that, I want to welcome you to our lands, where folks are taken care of and cared for, where we believe our biggest strength is our relationships, and our relationships to people being one of them, but specifically our relationships to youth. Our youth are our greatest achievement. They are the ones who carry our steps forward. So we focus very heavily on skilling them up, but also allowing them the freedom to be, to play, to explore, to teach, and to be themselves. And we also honor elders and ancestors. They encourage, inspire, and move us to be where we are now, to be where you are now. Their presence and knowledge is honored and valued. So youth get to learn from them and create with them, and they get to be taken care of in our space. We also honor our relationships to land. Our indigenous siblings and ancestors led us to unearth our own indigeneity and our practices, to be in relationship with the world around us, to grow food, and to viciously protect land, because we learned from our past what happens when we don't. And now getting to the past of what is right now for you. It is almost 2020, and climate crisis has almost reached a point of no return, and we all knew it. Some folks felt like people weren't doing enough, but others knew that folks who have been directly impacted have been fighting for years and generations. And as our environment was on a downfall, so was the rest of society. From children to Black, brown, and trans women missing, to families being displaced for the wealthy, there were so many wounds of oppression. Sometimes it was too much, but everyone kept fighting and building towards their liberation. And that's when the visionaries, the young people of that time, decided to rise up. It was their turn right at that time. It was a time of extreme creativity and openness, and they knew that the world that we lived in couldn't suffice. We needed more healing, more land connection, more safety, more community protection, more action, and we needed to create change and build towards that. They realized that even though we are all fighting towards liberation, there is no liberation if we have no safe place to exist, no water, no food, or land to claim. We needed to honor and protect this land to get to it, and we needed to come together, but also needed to pave a way for healing. First thing they did was decided that they had the power to fight back. There were many movements already happening at that time, led by those most impacted. So they rallied and organized to get others involved, because stagnation is no longer an option. They fought against big corporations, complacent governments, and they knew the future still needed to be created. So what they did was meet their community needs, but at the same time, they were bold enough to dream of the world they wanted, and that they would create and practice each step as they got there. They knew that at the time, they weren't yet ready for liberation, because they needed stronger, trusting, healing, and accountable community with everyone playing their part. A lot of visionaries knew that there was a lot of internal harm happening, and we needed to eradicate it in order to get to a harmonious future. Transphobia, anti-Blackness, settler colonialism, all those needed to be gone, and so they created avenues for healing and accountability. So one thing they created was the box. The box goal was decolonize the mind, identify colonialism's impact, and to relearn. It allowed folks to travel throughout their ancestral timelines and to find the roots of their beliefs around gender, sexuality, bodies, and power. And it opened up so many opportunities for folks to be accountable for themselves as both learners and teachers. to rebuild their own views in a space that was not only safe for themselves, but safe for the people who were coming into this new community. Where did you learn this? Does it serve you? Does it harm others? Those were some of the questions that the box asked. The box became extremely popular as it changed the lives of those in it, because we know when we create a world where the most invalidated can thrive, it's a world that's great for everyone. And the box is still used today as we welcome in newcomers. Of course, the box alone didn't get us here. It was honoring our relationships to people and to land, imagination and bold dreaming, action and repairing harm. We visioned so hard that we were pushed to create the reality, change, and we believed in our power as people. Now, in this new world that we are in today, capitalism and colonialism's impact is long gone. We focus on people and our relations. Every person has a role. We honor passion and natural instincts, free expression, and being our truest selves. We learn in indigenous ways, and we trust ourselves and our own knowledge because we, the people, have power. So sharing those pieces of history with you was an important part of our way because our biggest principle is to honor and teach our history. We made it through, but just barely. So knowing our history is also a source of power and resilience, and it allows us to dream and imagine even bigger than what is here today. So before I get back to the future and leave y'all to dream, create, and act, I want to leave you with this song to honor your histories, ancestors, to propel y'all into the future. I do not come here alone. I carry my people in my bones. I do not come here alone. If you listen, you can hear them in my soul. Thank you.
I also took this very literally. I've been told that's because I'm hella Capricorn, is what I've been told. So yeah, we're also gonna go to the future with me as well. And this slide is gonna change, and the magic is gonna happen right now. So I wanted to start by saying thank you. I want to start by saying thank you to the women of color, especially the Black women in my life, who have poured their brilliance, their love, and their labor into me so that I have the analysis that I have today. Because of them, I can stand in front of a room like this and talk about prison abolition like I know some shit. So I also want to thank you all. So fast forward to 2060. Dear Aretha, it's future Aretha. How you been, girl? I'm writing to you to tell you that Rihanna is president, Cardi B is vice president, and you married the love of your life, Aquaman. You're also a mermaid now. Congrats. Clearly, 2060 is popping. More importantly, I'm writing to tell you that we won. In the year 2060, the vision of No New Youth Jail has finally come to fruition. That movement that started back in 2012 with that disingenuous ballot initiative has changed our world. The youth jail was repurposed. In fact, all jails were repurposed. We learned from our friends Zach Norris and Deanna Van Buren in Oakland and turned all of our jails into restorative centers. The centers have job training and small business incubation for formerly incarcerated people. There are restaurants run by the people in the job training program, entire floors dedicated to community organizing, restorative justice spaces intentionally built to incorporate nature and comfort, which amplify the circle process. Along with repurposing all of our jails, we repurposed all of the courts too. Working with Deanna, we replicated the peacemaking centers of New York. Using circle process, facilitators bring together people in conflict, family members, friends, and other members of the community to talk about how an event affected each person. Through these conversations, people have been moved towards reconciliation and wellness. And since we have moved away from the archaic criminal legal system of your time, we have freed up some serious money. I can't believe the county used to spend $1.4 billion on courts, jails, cops, lawyers, and staff. You will be happy to know what we spend that money on now. We finally invested in the programs we knew worked. We implemented the curriculum Freedom Schools, Creative Justice, the Alabeka Academy, community passageways into schools. We got rid of school resource officers, expulsion, and suspension. We serve real food in schools. Rectangle pizza is gone. Kids of color have curriculum that centers them, history books that honor them, and food that nourishes their minds. We expanded the RBAC Corner Greeter program, and it has been a resounding success. Streets that used to be filled with cops are now filled with community volunteers. This is because of increased social engagement, community members being accountable, small business being connected to youth, and people being trained in de-escalation and response to emergencies. And girl, there's affordable housing in Seattle. Those few community projects by El Centro, Africatown, and Youngstown became the norm. Developers finally began working with historic communities to design spaces that reflected and honored the neighborhood. These buildings have art spaces, gathering spaces, small businesses, and affordable childcare. And we low-key saved the planet. After divesting from fossil fuels, switching to a green economy, and making meaningful investments that were outlined in the Green New Deal locally and nationally, we were able to slow down and eventually reverse the destruction of the planet. That 1.4 billion went pretty far, huh? This is when that DJ does that little scratch noise. Dear Aretha, it's future Aretha. I hope you are well. I'm writing to you from the year 2060, and let me tell you, we need your help. Donald Trump never left office. In fact, him and Jeff Bezos got married and deployed white supremacist robot babies everywhere. To make things worse, Rihanna canceled Fenty Beauty, and there's no more highlighter. The world is in chaos because of the climate crisis. It feels like a dystopia. South Park is underwater. In fact, most of Seattle is underwater. Most of the air in the world is too polluted to breathe. The entire Amazon burned down along with most of the rainforest. Entire populations of animals are extinct, and now more than half of the world's population are climate refugees. Because of where Seattle is located, we were one of the few places where the air is still somewhat breathable. This has drawn a massive migration of climate refugees to the area. But because we never fully changed the zoning laws, we have no capacity to hold all of the refugees arriving. Rents have tripled and quadrupled. Communities of color and low-income folks have to be shuttled in on boats. Encampments in tent cities have exploded around the city. The wealthy have stockpiled resources and good land. Meanwhile, everyday people are left scouring for dry land and fighting for scraps of resources, effectively making slums. Due to the flooding of so many neighborhoods, there are massive amounts of people living in very small and desolate areas. It is devastating to watch. As if that wasn't bad enough, the executive has doubled down on sweeping people from place to place. In order to pay for all of her new police officers, they have taken money away from social workers, housing, and food banks. This has led to more and more people being funneled into courts and jails, which have also expanded to match the population growth. Because of the huge influx of people and the encampment to jail pipeline, jails have become overcrowded. Instead of investing in housing, health, or social services, they have built more jails and prisons, which has desolated the tree canopy. There are now more jails and prisons than there are houses, community centers, or parks combined. The climate crisis has raged on. Because of this, people have been dying at alarming rates in the jails. More people have died in jails now than ever in history. Heat waves, floods, and the lack of food are killing people off faster than any of the diseases, which have also unfortunately blossomed. And there are now prison strikes every week for basic human needs. Even with the increase in courts, and the system is overwhelmed and a deadlock due to the number of people being incarcerated. You thought people were waiting for a long time in 2019 for their trials. People now wait years and years before even having their first hearing. And it's honestly common for people to die before their first hearing because of the flooding, heat waves, and lack of food. The world keeps burning, people keep running, they keep getting locked up, and they keep dying in the jails. It's become a deadly cycle. Please, for our future, do something. Sincerely, future Aretha. Both of these realities are on our horizon. It is the decisions that we make today that decide which of those worlds we get to live in. I hope that after today, after hearing our stories, we choose liberation because we have nothing to lose but our chains. Thank you.
So yes, as it was mentioned before, this is me on your left, on my left, your right. Of course, there's two things that you take away, right, from growing up. The smile and the body language. This is why I'm not behind the podium. I like to talk with my hands. And so growing up, I had a pretty traditional family. I have two older sisters. I was the first one in my family to graduate from high school and go to college. I grew up in Everett, which is 20 minutes north of Seattle. But you know what they say, Seattle is 20 minutes away from Seattle. So close by, definitely close by. I I was the first one in my family to graduate and end up going to college. And so I graduated from Inner High School. And I'm sharing all of these details with you about my life because this is a pretty similar life to many other people, my community, the communities that I belong to, that I will share a little bit more about in just a little bit. I was a first-generation college student. I went to UW. I graduated in 2013. And all through this journey of education and just being myself and living life, I was hiding really two secrets. And the first one being that I'm undocumented. And as you know, if you know anything about undocumented people, is that we've been in the US for a very long time, some of us. There's also millions of us here. So you're probably thinking to yourself, why? Why don't you just get in the back of the line to get your papers? Why don't you just seek citizenship? And the reality is that you can't. And the second, not for everyone, and the second sort of big secret was that I was gay. So I was basically coming out of two closets or jumping in and out as I sort of navigated my world and my community. I came out to my parents when I was 19. And so you can imagine growing up and sort of, coming out of the shadows, both as undocumented and as gay. I continue to do that every single day, depending on the places that I'm in. But I knew that one of the biggest things that somebody told me, which is why I like this particular graphic that's up there, somebody once told me, you have 3 strikes against you. You're undocumented, you're gay, and you're poor, right? And this was a white man that was telling me this. So you can imagine how hard my life was going to be based on those things, but I didn't let that stop me, so I got involved. And the beginning of my activism really started when I was 17 years old, the first time the Real Hope Act, Washington State Dream Act really came into play. And so that was the beginning of my journey. Years later, I got appointed to the Seattle LGBTQ Commission. I was the first undocumented person to ever sit in a city commission in the state of Washington and likely across the country. And the reason why all of these things are important for all of us is because of representation, right? As we think about how we move forward, how we pave the way for others, this is exactly the work that I, myself, and many others at Somos Seattle have basically dedicated ourselves to. We want to provide representation for our Latinx and our LGBTQ community, and both, and really set good examples for all of us. In June 15, 2012, my life really changed forever, and that was because President Barack Obama introduced DACA, right? And that was the beginning of a new life for me and for many other youth across the country, 800,000 youth across the country. But DACA wasn't just announced because some president or somebody who's in power said, oh, that's the right thing to do, even though that was part of his speech. But it really happened because of the activism of young people, of myself, every other dreamer that you probably know or have seen on TV. And we've seen this level of activism play out here locally in our state, with marriage equality, with every major social movement. We've seen activism through and through, of everyday people just like you and I. We saw it during the 1980s and 1990s with the AIDS epidemic, right? Where queer people, everybody was invisible. And it wasn't until people started to organize their local communities because people were literally dying, right? This is exactly the moment that we're in today. This is exactly the moment that we are in today where people have representation or they do not. And as we know, for immigrants, that means getting deported every single day. That means family separation for some of us, right? Or not knowing whether or not you're gonna come back to your house or get picked up at the bus stop. For others, it means being locked up in detention centers, right? Or just ending up incarcerated for whatever reason. We know, based on the jail population, that Black and brown people are numerous times more likely to be incarcerated. So we need to do better with that. And of course, for our LGBTQ community, particularly our transgender community, we know you don't know if you can actually walk out of your house and actually come back alive, right? That's a reality that we face. That's a reality that we live in. And I say this because, again, we've come together as a community to organize for different issues, and we still have long ways to go. And oftentimes, for whatever the topic is, somebody will say, well, that's illegal, or that's not right. And we have to remember that legality is a matter of power, not justice, right? We've all heard that quote, we've all seen it. And so I encourage you all, because I remember, raise your hand if you were at the airport when the Muslim ban took effect. Some of us rushed down there, and maybe for you, that was the first sort of engagement into activism, the first time that you did something important like that. So we've seen it before, we've done it before. Raise your hand if this was the first, in the last 2-3 years, under this administration, the first time that you got activated. Like you went to a protest, you did something with a community organization. Raise your hands high. Okay, so this is my movement. This is what I'm fighting for, right? This is the community that I have built. So I hope that as you think about, again, how do we move forward to a better future, to a better world, it really includes all of us. And it includes all of us being intersectional, doing work for each other, loving each other, supporting each other. Are you all ready for that? With that being said, I want to say happy Pride, everyone. It's 50 years. So let's continue for another 50 years once again. Thank you.
So my name is Ricky Reyes. I'm a Tacoma-born, Seattle-based creative community member. And today I'm just going to be asking y'all what we want radical leisure to look like. And we're going to get a little bit into that. But first, though, when I look behind my shoulder, I see the story of sisters who would call each other mother because their real mother, who was single and responsible for 14 kids, had to deal with the burdens that were placed on women and mothers, in particular black women, the two of which oftentimes conflict, sort of juggling life and death. And I wonder what leisure would have looked like for them had they had the time to do the things that they wanted to do rather than what they had to do. It's the story of a young man who would move to mainland, who's in the audience today, shout out, from Guam at a young age, and who would wake up before classes and work and pick fruit for just like minimum wage. And while today we'd sort of like praise their work ethic, I wonder from what currency we measure wealth with exhaustion and why we're so attached to it. The power, the pain, the organizing, all interconnected through my family's generational DNA, and I know that I'm not the only one who has these questions too, who wonders what would things be like today if those before me had the power and the privilege of leisure. Josette's about to come for me because I'm popping all my peas on this mic, and we just hung out with some middle schoolers telling them not to do that. Anyways, when I ask this question though, and every time this country seek to answer it through things like slavery, the Labor Relations Act, prison labor, I realize that it won't just go away, and that each year, each generation, this question is sort of redefined and morphs and shifts to breathe new life into this labor fatigue, and into this depression, and into this currency that we're taught to love and not question. I know a few of us probably have asked the question, what would it feel like if I had leisure today to do the things that I wanted to do? This is in Detroit right here. For those who did start to question, they're sort of like what questions turned into like who, what, and whys. So it started turning into like, why am I so tired? How have I worked this many hours this week? Why in some aspects of my job am I not able to show up as my full self? And who's responsible for this? But almost more revolutionary though, people began to ask who will be responsible for changing this? And it's in my letters to the future that I find myself seeking to join hands with that lineage of revolutionary questioning. I say questioning in part because I know that the answers are all around us. We have this like brilliant human power, but I also see that we sort of are losing sight of the questions at the heart of our movements. And because of that, shout out this day, it was a Thursday and I was drinking, I was like, ooh. But I'll ask this time, but with a slightly different twist, what will radical leisure feel like for us? So I'm gonna make a little bit of a pivot. During the early 2000s, there were these shows that kind of glorified the idealistic like workplace drama where everybody was homies and it was like, what's up, all my best friends are at work. And I kind of want us to examine that a little bit because at the same time, there's this recession going on where work as a promise as we knew it was kind of being decimated. Work as a promise of like 40 hours a week, retirement benefits, security, being able to make a living wage was really being decimated, and at their most accessible was being used for plot points for this TV show. And I have a quote here by John Malzark, who's a historian, and he says that a core belief system of capitalism, that a job satisfies our basic social needs, exposes the ideology of sacredcy and sacrifice that supports capitalism's discipline of production. So I'm not just for throwing quotes at y'all, so I'm gonna kind of like explain why I did that. But again, like as our assumptions would begin to be glorified through these shows, like I said, promises of healthcare, work weeks were being decimated. As a consequence of this lost promise, we, and when I say we, I especially mean like Black and brown people who have been taught that our self-worth and self-identity are wrapped in our exploitation of labor. We have gotten so lost that we have to figure out what it means to live lives derooted from capital and derooted from the idea that we are beings only built to be put on this earth to produce and consume. And I say that because I know like last night I was checking my work email at 10 o'clock and I was like, what the heck, like, oops, what the heck? I'm about to give a talk on leisure and I'm like checking my work email at 10, like what's going on? But I know at the same time, shout out Christopher Paul Jordan for this design, that if we could harness that power, it would be one of the most tide-shifting moments in this country. Like how powerful would it be to actually have time to play in the parks that we put in our communities, or to talk to our neighbors on our porches if we're fortunate enough to have them, or to build a society independent of the a social world independent of the market and the workplace. Now this is no small task, like I can't turn tides on my own. I can't build kinship by myself, and playing in those parks is much more fun with other people. So it's gonna take communities of people who are gonna push back against the old work ethic towards a new leisure ethic. I want us to think kind of beyond the Netflix minimalism documentary because it was kind of corny, but really it's gonna take a community agreement that the current state of production and consumption have come at the cost of cultural, ecological, and human capital. And that by realizing that we are all we need to produce the things that capitalism says that only it can do, that we're actually doing better for this earth and for each other. It'll take production as storytelling and consumption as hearing others. Production as music and art, and consumption as showing up to other people's shows. Production as the time spent building relationships, and consumption as the joy that we receive from those relationships. So just as I started with family, I'm gonna end with a homie who's in the crowd right now. Shout out my sister. I'm excited for the generations ahead of us who will be able to think beyond the confines of the hard work ethic that got us here, determined at the same time to break it down. The story of a young woman who's gonna be going to UW, I know there was a UW alum last time, who will be able to think beyond the confines of our parents and our grandparents. In my story, a first generation, queer, mixed race, Black student who was able to, again, like, do all of this on the shoulders of the hard work ethic that my parents and grandparents provided, determined to deconstruct it. Because together, we're building the story of what it means to come up with new identities for ourselves and new ways of being with each other, derooted from capital, and also possibly taking a nap along the way. Thank you, thank you.
I'm here to share a story. It is the story of the end of empire. It is a story of Reconstruction. And it is the story of the former United States and of New America. It is a story from the future, and as was witnessed and chronicled by this reporter. Here is one of the maps that was most striking at the time. It's visualized the 11 cultural and geographic sections of the US and the values each held. It's from author and journalist Colin Woodard. He published The American Nations in 2011. It's a history of the 11 rival regional cultures of North America. The left coast, for example, has utopian ideals, but fiercely independent streaks, also driven by tech in Seattle and the Bay Area. In 2024, a presidential candidate from the United States, an underdog, started to generate a buzz. Their platform, the creation of New America. The press called it radical, said it was impossible. Who was interested? Were there enough votes? Would Congress allow it? It didn't happen. The candidate lost before they ever even made it to the primaries. But in 2028, the numbers were there. California, Washington, and Oregon voted to secede the United States. They wanted to start over. At the time, they argued, the US was no longer fulfilling its core values. The following year, Colorado joined. The United States at the time was also battling economic realities of no longer being at the top of the global economy. It was considered unsafe because of mass shootings, and a large portion of the central US had undergone large-scale drought, while the East Coast had massive coastal erosion. Cities like Miami, New York, Boston saw an exodus. In the chaos, a rallying cry was NUA, New United America. The 4 former US states rallied around these lofty goals of universal health care, free college education, combating climate change. The international world watched. What would happen? Would it work? How? Would they collapse? Or would they be able to make it? NUA had a 10-year plan to transition into nationhood. This included major overhauls of fundamental systems and what they said was the best of the old system. Congress was built up of 3 different cabinets, of the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Presidential terms were adjusted to 5 years, with the last year being one where 2 presidents actually, let me go back to my notes, where 2 presidents would work in tandem for the transition. Congress was also expected to have equitable representation of the public. That meant 50% were women and 40% were people of color, just like the residents of NUA. But a major shift was their understanding of land. NUA didn't legally own much land. It was leased from First Nations and indigenous people like Miwok, Coast Salish, and Yakima tribes. The rest was owned by public cooperatives. And the cities that did remain were redesigned into garden cities. This is a picture of the NUA capital, Valor Nova. Each city set goals for green spaces and canopies. It battled the heat island effect in urban cities, improved air pollution, and even improved the mental health of city residents. The cities formerly known as Los Angeles, Seattle, and Portland, and Denver all developed new urban resilient forests. And when it came to climate policy, NUA vowed to tackle it head on. Cars were banned from the capital immediately. New America voted to be carbon neutral by 2045. The best scientists, policymakers, and leaders were set together to create a climate plan. With the power of the Pacific Ocean, solar, geothermal, and wind energy, NUA actually redesigned its power grid. But it was not perfect. Between 2038 to 2040, there were rolling brownouts and blackouts. Some residents accepted it as part of the change. Others did choose to leave. In 2042, Valor Nova scientists unveiled they had successfully found an efficient, low-cost, and sustainable hydrogen cell. It was scalable, and most importantly, they would be the production center for interested buyers. The UN invested an additional $1 billion in the next 5 years for increased production. In 2045, NUA introduced its new constitution. This is the preamble. Senator Reggie George, one of the 12 people who helped craft it, pointed to how important it was to have Black and Indigenous leadership, as well as the specific words of active justice and equitable peace. While capitalism was still the infrastructure for NUA, one key change was the work week. It was adjusted to 25 hours. 10 additional hours were allotted for family and community work. They could be flexed for parents to spend 10 hours at home working or with their kids, or 10 hours serving in hospitals or community gardens. Domestic labor was seen as an asset to be accounted for in the new economy. And for education, the NUA system was also radically renovated. Education Secretary said, "For too long, our curriculums have been ahistorical. Part of creating an educated and civically engaged public means teaching about our past mistakes. It also means creating space for critical thinking, allowing for art, play, and access to nature." Housing models in New America were based off mixed-use, hyper-dense models. This specific example of one of the new houses in NUA actually is an amphibious home. That means it actually rises with any seawater if it was at higher levels than what was expected. NUA's president also unveiled that they would not be having a military. Instead, it was a public force modeled after Costa Rica's system. It had 4 departments, one for immigration, another served as peace officers that were trained at the local community level. The other 2 departments worked in units combating higher level crimes, but drug usage itself was decriminalized and it was set to a restorative justice model. No longer having a formal Department of Defense, NUA had to purposefully be diplomatic in its international relationships. It formed alliances with the new Latin American Union. It also managed to bring 5 former US states into the new model. This is from Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. A senator from New America cited it in an argument for a new principle, rewriting, or rather editing, the new American Constitution for every 75 years. He said, for New America to be resilient, robust community, it must be adaptable. And for that, we must let it be a living, breathing document so that we may change with it and it may change with us. As for me, I'm launching this publicly funded news outlet, Media for the New America, MNA. I'm still working on the name, but I do plan to continue coverage. NUA needs local investigations. We need to see what works, what doesn't, and more importantly, why. Reporting from NUA, I'm Esmy Jiminez.